so excited to be with you today. Woohoo! I've been waiting to do these 3 webinars. Very excited because through the summer, what we're going to do is we're going to get you ready for the liturgical year 2018-2019. Oh my gosh, can you believe 2019? It's around the corner, especially for those of us who plan worship, because as soon as you know it, fall is going to be here, and you know, Advent will be right on the heels of everything starting back up. So my mantra, as you know, for those of you who've studied with me before in the worship design studio or out at a workshop, is plan together and plan ahead. And we're going to talk about that today. I want to get you ready, and actually not just ready, but excited for what you will do later on this year. I want this actually to be an amazing year of shift for you. If you are experiencing in any way stress around the planning of worship, I want you to feel a shift this year out of those things that stress you into a more creative and more life-giving process. And I know that when I get some ducks in a row, I can have a more life-giving process because I'm not just having this low level of anxiety in the background about Sunday coming around. On the screen here, we have 3 Get Ready webinars. Here's what we're going to do. Over the summer, we're going to have 3 segments. And today we're talking about, oh Lord, is it Sunday already? The fact that Sunday comes around every week, right? Planning together and planning ahead. Getting a structure for helping us have a more life-giving process and less stress around the planning. Then in August 8, we're going to have a webinar called What's Up? And that's about meaningful worship for our lives. And this will be much more about what is the context in which we are bringing a word. And God knows that it feels a little bit chaotic at the moment for many of us, for many of folks in our churches. So how do we deal with that? How do we decide what message to bring on a Sunday morning or whenever you worship? How do we decide what is going to be meaningful, bring a word of hope, a word of challenge, and help people to feel like when they come to worship, it's about reconnecting to the spirit of goodness, the spirit of possibility, the spirit of hope. So that's going to be our second webinar. We really talk about context and how we decide what kinds of themes that we want to do throughout the year. And that's going to get you ready to really begin to put on paper what are those things that you'll do throughout the 2018-2019 liturgical year. So that's the second webinar. The third one at the end of summer is going to be called As Easy as 1, 2, 3, Steps for Creating Meaningful Worship. And this is where I'm going to go through, we're going to get through some of the process today, but just the first couple of steps. But I'm going to take you all the way through the steps from beginning to end, from conceptualizing the story, the message, deciding what you're going to do, all the way to bringing that to fruition, executing the vision, and what you can do along the way to lower your stress, all right? So that's the idea. These webinars actually have a twofold purpose. One is for continuing education. So doing these 3 webinars is going to get you ready for the fall, going to give you some tools, some tips, and hopefully make that shift from that sort of low-level anxiety, or maybe it's high-level, who knows, about planning worship weekly to a more life-giving process. You can also get continuing education units if you do all 3 of those, and if you answer some questions that help us to know that you've watched them all, whether that's live or the recordings. So if you need continuing education units, please email us. And at the end of the third one, we'll give you a couple of weeks to finish that, and we will give out continuing education units, because this is going to be full of information and learning. And I just, you know, that's my purpose in life, is to help people keep learning. Even if you went to seminary, there are things that seminary didn't have time to teach you, especially around worship. So continuing education is one of the purposes. The other purpose actually is that these webinars are serving as a get ready for those who are signed up to come to my worship planning retreat in September in Lake Junaluska, North Carolina. Beautiful spot. So that's the other purpose, so that when you get to the retreat, we're going to hit the ground running with Advent, and you're going to know exactly how all of the material that I am presenting at that retreat. It's so much fun. I actually, each session, I go with a part of the liturgical year, and I give you ideas. I give you what I'm creating in the Worship Design Studio, and what you can draw on if you'd like to. But I also help you create your own series if that's what you want to do. And then I give you ample time to actually sit there and write and plan and decide, so that by the time you leave, you have the entire liturgical year mapped out. And that'll reduce some stress. I'll tell you that right now. I'll tell you more about that retreat later, but I just wanted to give you the link. We've got a lot of people signed up already. This will fill up fast. I usually do 3 every fall, and actually I'm only doing 1 this year because I'm teaching at San Francisco Theological Seminary, which is where I am right now in my office. So go to worshipdesignstudio.com/planning retreat if that's something that you're intrigued with, and you would love to come and have me actually in person guide you through the whole process. All right, friends. So this webinar today is focusing on the fact that Sunday comes around every flippin' week, right? Like clockwork, relentlessly. And people show up. And that fact alone could make us crazy if we let it. If we don't have a way to deal with the planning process so that we don't always feel like we're playing catch up, that we're not always on Monday, besides going, whew, Sunday is over, going, oh my God, Sunday's coming again. So we want the time that you get to really relax and not worry about it to be more consistent. And when you have a structure in place, that's when you can know, I should be working on this now. And you can also know, I don't need to be working on this now. And you can truly relax and have your life without sort of letting it run in the background. Oh my gosh, when am I going to have time to write that sermon, right? Okay, so that's what we're focusing on today. And that is the fact that it comes around every week. Many of you who are on may have been to seminary. You may be pastors. You may have learned in your worship course, if you were lucky enough to have one. I can't believe some seminaries don't even require it anymore. But you may have learned about the theology, the history of the parts of worship. You may have even gotten some practical experience of putting a service together. They walked you through it. This is how you pick hymns. This is how this is the order of worship, etc., etc. But you probably didn't get a lot of help learning about the creative process, the overarching process of designing worship week after week after week. And so most of us came out and we applied what we learned about putting one service together. We applied that to every week, and we tried to do that week after week after week. We tried to put that whole creative process in every week. And that in itself is a full-time job, much less all the other things that you do in your ministry besides worship. What we found out is that doing it this way is not sustainable if we really want to do something other than what I call plug and play worship, right? You know what I mean, plug and play, right? You plug in the hymns, you plug in the anthem, you plug in the scripts, you plug in the sermon title, and you hope to goodness it has something to do with each other, right? Because that's all the time we end up having if we're trying to do this process that we learned in seminary week after week after week, rather than taking a bigger view, a bird's eye view, and looking at the whole flow of projects. For instance, designing an entire series, an entire season, Advent Christmas, and then the Sundays after the Advent Christmas cycle, what I call Epiphany Plus, and then Lent. So we need a bird's eye view, and not all of us got that creative process in seminary. So we have to sort of acknowledge that one-hit wonder Sunday after Sunday also is not really the way that we communicate and learn anymore, right? You may have some memorable one-hit wonders, but if you don't have some repetition over time, things that repeat, revisiting a subject over time, what I call worship series, and that's not antithetical to lectionary preaching. I want to say that right now so you lectionary preachers don't go, I'm out of here. series can also have the lectionary as its starting point, but those things that we repeat and revisit over and over again, so we go deeper and deeper and deeper into that spiritual journey, that takes a bird's eye view. That takes a long range view, and it takes long range planning. So shift happens, my friends. I love saying that. Shift happens, and we have had some shifts. This little graphic that's up on this slide, I really love it because it's these projections layered on top of each other, and from ancient to modern. Actually, they're not postmodern. The most modern symbol on there is the Pink Floyd symbol. Which is retro to some. But at any rate, what it's saying is that we live in a world where so many different layers of ways that messages come to us, and that we have ancient texts, but we also have modern wisdom, and all of these things layer and have brought us to a place in our history where worship has become a little more complex than what I call a hymn sandwich. Right? So we used to be able to get away with a hymn sandwich. Couple of good hymns, sermon in between, good to go, right? It's just not that way anymore. We have such a more complex and sophisticated palette of the ways that we communicate. It's what I call sensory-rich communication, right? We immerse ourselves in a story in order to learn from it. You can see this in interactive exhibits at museums, even. I'm getting ready to go on a plane tomorrow, and I know that I'll get in the airport, and when I get to Chicago, I'll go down in that immersive, walk between terminals with music going on. And it's just a different kind of world that we communicate in. And so we have so many tools at our disposal to bring the message alive. And so that one of the shifts in the last few decades has gone from worship as a hymn sandwich to worship as a sensory-rich immersion into the message, the story, the feel, the experience of God, right? Not just about God, but the experience of God. There's another shift that I call shifting from worship being checking off the to-do list, right? We go through the line items in the bulletin until we're done, and then we're done. We go home. I want us to not see it as an agenda, because friends, we have too many lists and agendas in our jobs, at home, things, our to-do list, for worship to feel like a to-do list. I want us to feel like worship is an experience from beginning to end, that we enter into the story, we experience, we encounter the divine, and we learn from it, we grow from it, we're challenged by it, we're lifted up by it, and then we go home. That's a very different thing from going down the list, right? So that's another shift that's happened. And then that shift from, oh Lord, here comes Sunday again, kind of planning, to big picture planning, right? That bird's eye view, that long view that takes that long range planning. And that's what I'm really going to encourage you about. Now, some of you may already be doing long range planning. That's awesome. I know there are many people on here who have been members of the Worship Design Studio for a while, and you have learned how to do that long range planning. That's awesome. But sometimes we need to just tweak the process a little bit, because we might come up with ideas way ahead of time, but then we get stuck and we don't actually carry out the ideas, and week to week still feels like a stress. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So really what I'm talking about is moving from that plug and play kind of worship, right, where we're just plugging it in, we could phone it in if we wanted to what I call intentional design. You are a ritual artist. This takes artistry, right? To bring visuals and media and words and music and bring it all together. Action of the congregation, congregational participation, and to imagine how we can bring the story alive in all of those ways. It takes some intentional design. So where are you on this spectrum of plug and play on one end and intentional design on the other end that I'm talking about? So take just a moment to think about, and this may be a better question, the second one. What are the stressors for you in planning worship? Where in your process do you kind of get a little bit like, oh gosh, I wish I had a day job, or a 9-to-5er where I'm not doing this every week. Where is it that you get that feeling like, This is just so hard. So think for just a moment, jot it down where you are, or put it in the chat box if you want to. What are the stressors? What are those moments? Is it the sermon writing and last minute? Do you get really nervous about that? Is it, if you're a music director, is it that you don't know early enough what the focus is, and you'd really like to have music have to do with the whole thing, but you know, you can't rehearse the choir unless you know a certain amount ahead of time. You know, what are those moments of stress? Okay, great, they're coming across. Time to do longer term planning. While also responding to the crisis of the day. Absolutely. We'll talk about that. I can't seem to get the time to get ahead. Yes. Oh my gosh, it's a catch up, isn't it? This is why we're starting at the beginning of the summer and taking it in slow bits so that by the time we get to fall, you have a plan in place that will help jumpstart you into that plan ahead mode. Like to have more teamwork. Yes, Kathleen, beginning a new call, don't know if there's any opportunity to work with others in planning. It's a small church. I have so many small churches who are part of the worship design studio because you get me on your team, right? So just right away, Kathleen, just know I am on your team. The worship design studio is on your team. And we're going to talk a little bit in just a moment about the fact that you probably already have a team just built in, and how to see that in a different way. So getting others involved in the planning, hard to get the pastor to plan ahead, stress when we break with church traditions, right? So wanting to push the edges, but then being worried about how people are going to react. Oh, that's a whole other subject, the politics of change, and that's something that I talk about in my retreat. Our last session is about moving forward. Now you have all of these plans. I mean, people are just like exhilarated at the end of the retreat because they're like, oh my gosh, I know what I'm doing the rest of the year. And then they start to get a little bit uneasy when they think, oh, how is so-and-so going to react to this? So on the last session, we talk about the politics of change. We talk about introducing things in incremental steps. We talk about how to talk about it, that kind of thing. That is a golden part of the process when you come to one of my retreats. Okay, so you are not alone, right? You are not alone in these stressors. So let's see if over these 3 webinars, you can get some tips about lessening that stress, addressing those things, and also then if you come to my retreat, you're going to absolutely have a jump start in planning ahead. Okay, this is a friend of mine, and where I got the title for this webinar. Oh Lord, is it Sunday already? This was actually, you are just not going to believe this. This is actually, his staff made this as a bulletin cover for one Sunday because they got so tired of him every week saying, oh Lord, is it Sunday already? Oh my goodness. So he actually gave me permission to show this, so I have to say that. And also because, you know, as I consulted with their church and helped them see some steps so that he could get out of that stressor, they had no need for the bulletin cover, but it did make an impact when he first did it. So I wish I'd said this quote: "The only difference between a rut and the grave is the depth." Isn't that great? We all get into ruts. I get into a rut. I know that my rut is when I have waited too long to start the creative process, and all I can do, all I have time to do, is to do what I'm familiar with. All I have time to do is to do what I've done before, because I don't have time to go search for something new, to think of a creative idea. Creativity is, you know, some people say, oh, I'm most creative when I have a deadline. Well, you're most productive when you have a deadline. You actually put things in place because you have to. But creativity actually loves, part of the creative process is steeping, right? Thinking about it, working on it, and then having some time to just steep without the pressure of the deadline, because more ideas will come through. And that's why in my process of planning ahead, I build in there some significant time for the research, the resource gathering, the brainstorming, so that new and better ideas can come up. So the grave, that's when we've been in the rut for so long that we don't know how to get out of it. We're going to get you out of it. Don't worry. You're not in the grave stage. You might be in the rut stage, but you're not in the grave stage. Now, this is super important to me, this whole thing, and I'm going to tell you why. Something called the percent factor. This is a question that I've been asking people in my workshops for about 3 or 4 years now. And that is, what percent of the people in your pews Sunday morning or worship, whenever it is you worship, Sunday morning, Saturday night, whatever it is, what percentage of the people that are there for that is their only connection to the church throughout the week? In other words, they don't really participate in a consistent way in other things throughout the week. Worship really is their connection to the church. Now, this is going to be different depending on the size of church, the location of your church, the demographics of your church. But what I can say to you is that by far, in the workshops where I have gotten that feedback, most churches say over 50% of the people, and as high as 85%, 85% is pretty consistent, of people who come on Sunday morning, that's their only connection to the church. My follow-up question to that is, what does that mean for how important the time is that you give to planning for that 1 hour of worship, or however long your worship is? That puts a lot of importance on that. And here's the thing that we often do is we sort of become captive to the emergency that happens throughout the week. And when we become captive to the emergency, the regular things like planning for Sunday, they get put on the back burner. And all of a sudden now my time to do this gets shorter and shorter because things are happening. Stuff happens, right? And so this then gives you less and less time to do the thing that has the greatest impact on the most number of people of anything you do in your ministry. Is that making sense? I know you have lots of other things, and I'm not saying they're not important, but I am saying with a shift in our strategy for how we plan and planning further ahead, we can take out the probability that some emergency is going to happen and completely blow the time that you have to get ready for worship, so that you really can give the worship planning the time it deserves, the effort it deserves, the attention that it deserves. All right, 2 things that cause anxiety. One is not having a plan at all. A structured way of doing things is immediately going to give you the confidence that you know what you're doing, when you're doing it, and when you can relax. So for me, I'm a list maker, right? I can have this overwhelming surge of anxiety about having so many things to do. And because I just know it's so many things, but I don't exactly know what it is. It's just there's so many things. Until I make a list and see exactly what it is and then prioritize that list. As soon as I do that, I feel 100% better already. And I haven't actually done any of those things. I just have a plan. And I go, okay, I can do this, right? So getting a good structure. So that's what we want to do, is get you a structure that helps you to get through the process and give yourself the time that this planning deserves. So the other thing is that not having help is another cause of stress. And we already saw that in the chat box when I asked what stresses you out. That's what we saw, planning ahead and having people help you. Now, this is a tricky one. I get all kinds of comments about this. A lot of people say they have no worship team, right? They're a small church, or they inherited a situation where people expect that the pastor's going to do it all, or the pastor and the music director, they do it all. That's what we pay you for. So, I don't have a worship team is one of the things I hear. Or it's hard to get people on a team. Or once we have people, it's more work than it's worth because they don't know what they're doing and they don't know how to help. And we don't know how to tell them to help us. And that takes a lot of time to tell them what to do to help us. And we end up saying, I'd rather just do it myself. I could do it in half the time, right? But if we keep doing that, then that's how we set up not having any help. And the other thing that happens is that Teamwork, sometimes folks say, nobody has time for meetings. Putting together, actually getting people to a meeting is so hard and laborious, we gave up, right? Okay, so what if I could tell you have a team already, you can actually build that team, and you don't have to have a bunch of meetings. Yeah, right? So towards the end of our webinar, that's what I'm going to clue you in on right there. So here's what I want to do for you. I want you to know the first step to get a plan that will alleviate the stress of the weekly rush. And I'm going to show you how to get help that's not more work than it's worth. Okay, here we go. Let's start with the creative process. This is a picture of the Worship Design Studio. I know I have some members here that have logged on. Some I haven't talked to in a while. It was great while we were waiting. Edwin, who's been is a pastor whose church has been part of the Worship Design Studio for 3 years, says, after 3 years of doing worship inspired by Worship Design Studio, it has become a way of life, a way of thinking, and a way of doing ministry with expectation and enthusiasm. I love that, Edwin. A great, unique feature in our growing congregation. Ooh, he's got a growing congregation. It has shaped the way I think and do ministry. It's all your fault. Thanks. Love it. Thank you, Edwin. Great testimony to what happens when you do get a great plan and you know what the creative process is and you work the plan. So I spent years with worship teams and studying creative processes. And I came up with a system of planning together and planning ahead that I teach in the Worship Design Studio. And this comes from my research and from this anecdotal evidence of best practices, churches like Edwin's that I worked with, and they sort of helped me know what's working, what's helping. So here's the creative process. Essentially, it's 4 steps along the way. Again, in the third webinar, I'm going to break it down even more, but let's just get the bigger picture. What's the message? That's our first step, conceptualizing the story, getting a sense of where we're going. Next webinar, we're going to spend a lot of time with that because it's really important, I think, in this age especially, to figure out how to bring a word of hope. What ideas can help bring the message alive in a vital way? That's about brainstorming and resource gathering. Right? And I'm not talking about one meeting where we're sitting down going, oh, what do we do? What's a great idea? We did that before, right? I'm talking about an expanded period of time. What do we do? What do we need to do to prepare? Once you figure out what you're doing, then you have to get ready to do it. Task organization, creating, rehearsing. And then are we ready to lead? Now, that may not sound like a part of the creative process, but it is, because in worship, which is a live event, we have to be so confident in our leadership and what we're doing because we have walked our bodies through. We have rehearsed it, not so it can be perfect, but so that in the moment we can be truly present and able to switch streams or go with the flow of what the Spirit is leading us to do in the moment. So it can be better than we ever imagined or we ever planned. Now, friends, in the plan ahead model, what is the message? That begins months before the first series that we're planning for. So that is why we're starting now to think about this, and that is why I have, planned this retreat in September. And we're not going to start talking about and planning for September, October, November. No, actually, we're going to start with Advent. We're going to be that far ahead in starting to think about what we're doing. So then when the seasons come along, that brainstorming and resource gathering, you're going to have a full month to do that. Remember I talked about that steeping part of the process? That's when you get to you start looking around and you start seeing things that remind you of that message, and you start to get sermon illustrations, and you start to get visual ideas, and you start to take pictures that you can use on the screens, and you have all that yummy creative time that's low pressure because it's not coming up this Sunday. All right? You have a whole month for that. And then for number 3, we get down to brass tacks, as we say, task organization, that kind of thing, getting all our ducks in a row. We give ourselves 4 weeks, 3 weeks until we're like the week before the season starts. And that gives us enough time to get all our ducks in a row so that by the time the series starts, we're not doing much of anything week to week except polishing and having more time to write our sermons. Hello. Can you imagine having twice the amount of time and 100% more ease when you sit down to write your sermon? Oh, the heavens open, the angels sing. Yeah. So as I said, many people have been cramming this whole process into one each and every week, right? 1 through 4 in each and every week. And that's a recipe for burnout. So you might do actually the first couple of parts of the process ahead of time. But if you're still leaving the details, that third one, getting the ducks in a row for week to week, that's still going to, over time, create stress and burnout. And all those great ideas you came up with weeks before, all of a sudden you realize, I don't have time to implement that. It was a great idea, but that takes more time than this week to get together. And so the good ideas start falling off. So, in my latest book, I wrote about Think Like a Filmmaker, and I interviewed filmmakers about their creative process. Because like filmmakers, we have the visuals, we have the media, we have the words, we have the music, we have the action, all of that stuff, sensory-rich worship. And so our timeline has to look a little bit more like a production timeline for the theater or for film than this weekly kind of thing, unless you just want to do plug-and-play worship, right? So we're going to stretch those parts of the creative process. As I said, we're going to start them earlier, and then going to have more concentrated times along the way. You're going to get rid of, if you're doing weekly meetings to prepare worship, you're going to get rid of those. You're still going to meet weekly, but it's so that you can just walk through the service that's coming up, right? You're going to have a whole other process and timeline for meeting that really draws on the best of creative processes, immersing yourself in each part of the process in a way that's not this weekly stressful thing. Is this making sense? Just put something in the chat box that you're sort of getting the idea of this shift that I'm talking about, right? We want shift to happen. Loads of sense, says Nancy. Awesome. Smiley face from Linda. Okay, great. Again, third webinar, end of August. I'm going to go deeply into detail about that timeline, but I wanted you to get this overall sense here and what you can do right now to actually start that whole process. So, what we're going to do, the first step, here's the first step that you need to do in order to jumpstart this whole process and get planning ahead is, drumroll, go on retreat. What's not to like about that? Go on retreat, pastors especially. I'm talking to you. I call you the visionary, so this is a visionary retreat. Go on retreat, go away, go out of town, go overnight. Put backups to your backups in place to hold this time sacred. This is not a vacation, but I do want you to go away, right? Putting yourself in a beautiful, inspirational spot is not a bad idea. I hold that really dear when I'm doing my planning. I want to be in a beautiful place because it inspires me. I know about myself that when I get to a place where I can see, where I can have a vision, it helps my actual vision. Right? That's something that I know about my creative process. And so when I do my retreats, I always take people to beautiful places because I want you to feel that depth of spirit in the midst of the work, right? This is one of the most important things that you can do, most important gifts that you can do for your congregation. And those of you who are lay people who are on this webinar or watching it, I want you to support this and know how important this is that your pastor do this. Now, it may be your pastor and some other folks. We're going to talk about that in a moment, whether you go alone or with others. And there's different reasons for doing that. But twice a year. So the first one would be September-ish to look at Advent through Pentecost. That's half of the year, half of the liturgical year. And then you would go again in January or February-ish to look at ordinary time. So you see, I'm giving myself months of buffer before the first one that I need to be planning, right? Now, in my retreat that's coming up, September 9 through 12, and I put it in September, like I said, so we get enough of a buffer. And even though I want you to go to 2 retreats, I'm going to take you all the way through ordinary time. You're going to go home with a whole bunch of ideas, of just seeds of ideas for ordinary time. But then I want you to take time again in January, February. You won't be coming to a retreat with me, but all the ideas that you have planted in my retreat for ordinary time, you're going to revisit. So again, twice a year is a great way, a great rhythm, right, to do that. Again, this retreat in September, I will take you and you will go home with actual plans and ideas, very concrete things for all the way Advent through Pentecost. And then in our Tuesday night session, we brainstorm and you brainstorm with others and you come up with, most people go home with 20 different ideas of things that they could then when they go on retreat January, February, that they can choose from and begin to develop even more. So if you haven't signed up for that and you're thinking about it, I actually want to encourage you to go ahead and do that. Like I said, I'm only doing one retreat this year rather than 3, and we have limited seating, so I want you to get in there. You can come by yourself or come with a team. So let's talk a little bit more about the retreat so that I can help you understand more about what you do on a visionary retreat, whether that's by yourself, on your own, without me guiding you, or whether you come to mine. When the pressure is off, we have time to discern the spiritual journey that's needed for this year, for this community. We have time to consider several possibilities and choose the best one for the moment, right? That's something about the creative process, is that if you are under pressure, if you're right up against that deadline, you go for the first good idea. And actually there's second and third and fourth good ideas. So when you're long-range planning, when you have enough of a buffer, you have time to consider several possibilities and choose the best one for this year, for this time. And you have time to let the creative process also be a spiritual practice and not a burden, right? You get to do some really some deep journaling, praying, connecting with God, discerning the spiritual journeys that you will lead your congregation on. During the retreat, you want to decide on worship series for half of the year, as I said, and you're going to return home from your retreat with enough information to jumpstart the brainstorm and resource gathering process with some other folks. And that happens again about 2 months before the series begins. So you're going to go home with half a year worth of ideas, all right? So you come home September 12th, you get home, you have Advent Christmas, Epiphany Plus, which is a long season this year, so you might have 2 series for that, Lent and Holy Week, Easter season, all the way up through Pentecost. But then you're going to have enough information about each one of those ideas so that when you pull out 2 months before Advent or 2 months before Lent, you pull out your ideas from the retreat, you have enough information there to go, oh, that's what I was thinking, right? And we're going to talk next webinar about how to really put your ideas on paper so that it is actually pre-prepping sermon preparation, sermon writing, right? All the way up in the visionary retreat, you start prepping that sermon. So when you come to my retreat, some people fill out this, if you like, writing with a pen, some people fill out this page about every one of the series ideas they come up with. And what's really fun at the retreat is that at the end, we cross-pollinate. So you could get ideas, actually, just one church among many churches at this retreat, and you're going to get to cross-pollinate. So you might actually go home with many ideas for all of the seasons because we cross-pollinate. So some people like to do it by hand, and then some people like to use our Worship Design Studio app where you're entering the information in and it's creating these amazing documents that you can hand to your music director when you get back, and they're going to like fall to the ground weeping with gratitude if you give them something like this months ahead of time. It will improve your relationship, I promise you. And so some people like to use our app, and when you come to my retreats, you get access to the Worship Design Studio for the duration of the retreat and a little bit before and afterwards. And of course, if you're a member of the Worship Design Studio, you know that you have access to 11 years worth of worship series ideas. And that is a huge jumpstart. Basically, we are helping you with step 1 and step 2 because we give you the ideas for the series, but then we also give you ideas for every worship art for every Sunday of those series. And then you get to just pick and choose, use the ones that work for you, tweak, let that be a jump off for your own ideas. And then we have the fully scripted ones. Let me just say, I'm going to plant a little seed here. What I'm working on right now, because I have to plan ahead twice ahead of everybody else, because I want to get you materials so that you can have those ahead of time, way ahead of time. So I'm working on Advent right now, and we're doing a series. My new fully scripted series is called Calm and Bright, 200 Years of Silent Night. Oh, I'm so excited. It's the 200th anniversary of Silent Night, the hymn, the most beloved moment on Christmas Eve of many people, even people who only come to church once during the year on Christmas Eve. And it's the 200th anniversary, so I'm creating an entire series for Advent Christmas that uses the verses of that hymn to help us go deeper and deeper into how we are called to be calm and bright in this world. And boy, the world needs some calm and light, right? Peace and light. So I'm really excited about this. And of course, if you're a Worship Design Studio member, you know that all of these things are free to you. That's part of being a member of the Worship Design Studio. Okay, so moving on, we're getting into the final 15 minutes of our webinar. So here's the question: to bring people or not to bring people with you on your visionary retreat. This really depends on your working style and your own creativity and what you need for creating. I need to be alone a lot when I'm in the initial stages of creating. And then I need to bounce things off of other people. So I know that about myself, and it's really good to sort of discern, to think about what we're going to do. Jenna, if you would do this, when we send out the recording, let's send out the Visionary Retreat document from the Worship Design Studio, so that those who are not part of the Worship Design Studio can see some of the questions that I ask when I'm discerning, do I want to go alone or with others? Now, some people come to my retreat on their own, and I have that in quotes, because what happens is that you may come on your own, but because during my sessions when I'm teaching, you're with other people who have come on their own, you do get a little bit of interaction with people. But then when I set you to working on your own, some people decide to go off and sit in a rocking chair at Lake Junaluska on the one of the many balconies overlooking the lake and work on their own, really on their own, because that's how their creative process and their discerning happens. And some people like to stay at the table where there's other people around, because that energy helps them stay in the process and keeps their energy up. So it's really, you're coming on your own, but once you get to the retreat, you also have choices. Now, some of you, if you don't come to my retreat, you might go just on your own. But if you do that, I really want to encourage you to create your own schedule. Stay on your schedule and give yourself a process to help pull you through, so that when you get through with the time you've allotted, you've actually done all the things that you wanted to do. Structure is really important. So if you're not going to have somebody like me guiding you and helping you with structure through a retreat, make a structure for yourself. All right, some people decide to come with a team. And we have lots of teams who come to these planning retreats. And one of the most common things that they say afterwards is, oh my gosh, we really bonded as a team. We got so excited because we experienced you leading us through some examples and things. We began to not only just plan, but also while we were there, we began to talk about, oh, we could improve this by just doing this. Or look what Marcia just did in that example. We could totally do that. We've never thought of that before. So there's a lot of advantages to coming as a team, not the least of which is that you get to take that excitement, and not just you, that's pastor, but a bigger group of people can take that excitement home and spread that excitement. And they're on the bandwagon for that planning ahead process. And you don't have to teach it to other folks. So that's a great way of bringing a team. Because we want to encourage you to bring a team, we think that's a really great way to teach people and to get more people on board. We have one flat rate in the registration for our worship design studio planning retreats for 2 to 6 people. So it's an amazing deal. You're not paying per person, you're paying per team. So we have 2 rates. We have a flat rate for a team, 2 to 6 people, and then we have an individual rate if you're coming on your own. So, both of those ways work, and they're good decisions for different reasons, but you just have to know you and what's really going to help you be most creative and most productive. Okay, so here we are with our planning, our 4 parts of the planning process. And the last thing I want to do here in the last 10 minutes is I want us to think about planning together. So drawing on that teamwork that I just talked about. So besides, not cramming the entire process in 1 week, additionally, many pastors try to do all of these things by themselves. For all those reasons I said before, all the difficult reasons, and they're valid, difficult reasons for, working with a team and getting people involved and keeping them excited and helping them know exactly what to do. So let's talk about what is a worship team. For me, I kind of want to blow up the traditional concept of a worship team, that has monthly meetings or weekly meeting or bi-weekly, whatever it is. And I also want to blow up the idea that you're going to do weekly meetings and plan worship every week. We've already talked about that, but I want to blow up the idea of what is a worship team. Anyone who contributes to worship is part of the worship team. So those of you who have said to me, I don't have a worship team, I'm in a small church. Well, I'll bet you have somebody who gets there and turns on the lights, maybe. Well, maybe it's you. But you might have somebody who is at least at the sound system, volunteer perhaps. You have somebody handing out bulletins. You have even a part-time musician. You have a team. You already have a team. That's part of your team. A team does not have to be a committee of people who have signed on for a year. We all know that's really hard these days to get people to commit to anything, much less for a year. So I want us to think differently. I want us to think in 3 tiers, all right? So the first tier is what I call the core team. Those who work on worship all the time. Okay, pastors, that's you. It's part of your job. It's what you do. Right? But you may have even a part-time music person, or maybe you have a full-time, maybe you're from a larger church that has more people who are part of their job description is to work on worship all the time. And likewise, maybe you have some volunteers who have the time, love it, have been doing it for years. Let's say the people who come and put the flowers, make sure the flowers are in the vase every week, or people who make sure that communion elements are ready, right? Those are people who work on it all the time. We don't want to say, we're doing a new and completely different configuration of the worship team and we don't need you any longer. Thank you very much. We're not going to do that. There's no reason to do that. No reason to alienate in the middle of making something new, all right? We're going to continue to use their gifts, but we're going to rethink how we do that. Now, the second sort of level of participation is what I call a series team. Some people who work on worship only for a season. So you might add 1 or 2 people who are only going to work on the Advent Christmas series, right? And so because they're only working on that, and you're going to ask maybe another person, different person, to work on Lent, right? Or the Sundays after Epiphany Plus. You're going to rotate people, and basically you're not asking them because they have a particular talent per se for music or visual arts or media or whatever. You're asking them because they can give their effort and enthusiasm to the process and helping you do some of the tasks that need to be done. All right? So when we talk in the 3rd webinar about the very nitty-gritty of what's done when, I'm going to tell you exactly where you plug folks in at what point. But I just want you to get the idea of what a team could be that's different than a committee, a year-long committee. Okay, so you have some people rotating in and out to help with fresh energy. Oh, we all need fresh energy, right? Fresh energy and effort. And then you're going to have what I call the extended team. These are people that have particular passions and gifts, and you match those with a specific task. All right, that's all you're doing. So let me give you a couple of examples. You might have a choir member who's been coming to your church for a long time. They love the hymnal. They know it very well. They know the hymns your church loves to sing, but they have a real appreciation for the hymnal. Let's say that you are going to do a series about light for Advent Christmas. You ask them to go through the hymnal and make a list of all songs about light from the hymnal. You're not asking them to choose what Sunday it goes with. As soon as you make decision-making part of the process, it's not fun anymore for somebody because they're anxious about making the right choice. They're just making a list. And it's okay if there's some songs on there that might not even be close to what you need. Doesn't matter. Because when you finally sit down a month before the series begins and you're ready to start putting hymns in the right place, or songs, whatever you call it in your style of worship, you have somebody who's done the footwork for you. That's amazing, right? Or some youth that's on the computer all the time and you say, we're doing a series about light. I want you to find all the beautiful candle photography that you can on this website that's royalty-free photos. I want you to just download them, drag them into a folder, and send them to me. Boom. You are so ready to start when it's time for production. Do you see how I'm saying you match somebody's gifts and talents with a specific task? You're not asking them to come to meetings, right? But you're getting help. I hope that's making sense. So this is the way I'm talking about blowing up the idea of a worship team. You already have one, and it's easy to make one if you feel like you need more help. But through these 3 webinars, we're going to get more and more specific about how you can make that happen. All right, so reminding you, June 28th, that's today. We've talked about planning together, planning ahead. Hopefully this has whet your appetite, gotten you excited for going on retreat, beginning that plan ahead process. And don't worry, especially those who are going to come to my retreat. One of the things that I do is I send you a couple of series for the fall so that you are not working so hard as you make the switch from week to week planning to that plan ahead, right? So I'm going to help you every step of the way. August 8th, what's up? Meaningful worship for our lives. We're going to talk about what do we talk about in this day and age. What are the messages we need to hear? August 30th, as easy as 1, 2, 3, steps for creating meaningful worship. Again, we're going to get into much more detail about the creative process, the timeline, and how to do that. So that when you come to my retreat, those of you who have signed up already or are about to sign up, you can hit the ground running, and we're just going to, it's going to be amazing. All right. So friends, 3 different ways that you can continue this if you want to between the webinars. Do something good for yourself, and that is 1, sign up for the retreat. Those of you who are Worship Design Studio members, something you may not know yet is that Sunday night is when the retreat begins for you, because there's a special VIP reception for year-long Worship Design Studio members. Oh, it's going to be so much fun. My mentor is coming, who's about to retire, Howard Hanger. He's going to play piano. He's going to sing. He's going to talk to us about creativity and just get our juices flowing for the whole week. That's going to be awesome. You can sign up for Worship Design Studio, become a full member, and that is at worshipdesignstudio.com/WDS. But here's the way you want to do it to get the most bang for your buck, and that is sign up for the retreat. We're going to give you at checkout the chance for $100 off of Worship Design Studio a full year. And that is good. With those 2 things, your next year is made already, like made. Amazing. And I also have the book that I mentioned, thinklikeafilmmaker.com. You can get it at Amazon, or if you want to get 3 or more copies, we give a better discount at our website, thinklikeafilmmaker.com. And so you can be reading that through the summer as well. That will really, jumpstart you for these next couple of webinars. So thank you so much, everybody, for being on. If you're watching this recording, and I'm talking about links in the chat box, never fear. We always put those links down below in the description box. So all those links are there. And we'll be sending out this recording, because if you are on live and you're going, oh, I wish so-and-so could have heard this, you're going to have the recording and send it to them, ask them to watch it. And again, if you want continuing education units, just let us know. At the end of all three, we'll send out a questionnaire so that you can prove to us that you actually listened to me. And then we're glad to be able to issue continuing education for this. Okay, friends, take care. I'll see you August 8th on the next webinar. Bye-bye.